I'm going to try to keep this short and sweet. I was trying really hard not to make this video, but it has to be said. When you look at the arguments I've made about spiritual bottom feeders and how they are the biggest murderers historically and currently in the world, feminism has almost single-handedly allowed for abortion, and they teamed up with a racist / eugenicist who wish to limit the population of the quote-unquote less civilized or less developed peoples, especially. When you look at how the LGBT community has teamed up with the biggest murderers in order to get their agendas across, proving definitively that LGBT-friendly philosophies are extremely dangerous and kill people because it is an extremely selfish philosophy that completely disregards the values of the people around them. It completely disregards human life in order to get their agenda across, and that they are more than capable. They prove that they lie all the time, and it is the worst types of lies that kills the most people. Abortion is the #1 cause of preventable death in the world. So when you look at these philosophies, materialism, Satanism, which is basically another word for materialism, Satan is the god of this world. Criminality is a philosophy. Atheism, looking back at how most of the killers in history who profess to be Christians and Muslims and so on, by their actions it was quite apparent that they did not fear God, which means they couldn't have possibly been a Christian and almost certainly were atheists. But we do know that communist regimes were atheists. Stalin, Mao, etc., the biggest killers in history. So should we be surprised when these people have teamed up together to kill, babies with abortion, and teamed up with mental health to kill over 500,000 people with psych meds in Western countries alone? Should we be surprised? No. Because these philosophies, the actual version of these philosophies, enables one to do these horrible, horrible things. So when we're talking about radical Islam as a threat to Western values, we're really talking about the values of the people in charge, not the predominantly Christian population of America, which is much more threatened by godless philosophies and feminism than it is by radical Islam. Radical Islam poses almost no threat at all to Christian values, but feminism, which is growing rampantly, and almost half of women self-identify as feminists, does pose a big threat to Christian values. Atheism, which something like 10% of America are now atheists, it's been growing slowly but surely, is a threat to Christian values. So when you look at what philosophies kill the most people and what philosophies are the biggest threat to the majority of Americans' values, it is not radical Islam. That is very far down on the list. It is Satanism, criminality, LGBT community philosophies, feminism, atheism, and racism. And of course, mental health and different institutions are helping them attack the American people's values. There's a difference between the American government that has sold us out and their satanic Saturn worshipping values, and the values of the majority of American people who are pretty much credited with founding this nation, because the majority of the people who fought in the American Revolutionary War were Christians. The majority of people who fought on America's side in World War I and World War II were Christians. Christians are the ones who built this country and made it what it is. And it was these kind of secret society guys who were governing them. But if you were going to be fair about it, that the values of the American people are Christian values. Now, let me, this is just leading me up to my point. And I'm talking quick, I apologize, because I want to make this short. And I want to get to my point. I'll now slow down my speech so you can understand my point. Now, the #1 argument, and logically the only argument that one can make to try to address this, is to say that just because someone is a Christian doesn't mean that they are perfect. It doesn't mean this, that, and the other. I have more than addressed this argument in the past by saying that the actual philosophy of a Christian does not enable one to do these things if they follow that philosophy, versus the actual philosophies of the spiritual bottom feeders. More than enabling them, they have historically encouraged them to do horrible things: mass murder, rape, abortion, drugging people to death, and so on. Okay? So now let's address that argument thoroughly, shall we? Even though I've already more than addressed it. You see, why do Christians who are not perfect fall into the traps of sin, fall victims to temptation? Well, it is quite simple. The spiritual bottom feeders' philosophies are tempting the Christians. There are spiritual bottom feeders that are pimps, for instance, that tempt Christians to adultery. There are spiritual bottom feeders that are gays that are trying to recruit Christians and their children, and so on. So what makes a Christian not perfect? It is when a spiritual bottom feeder, 9 times out of 10, what leads them to astray, what makes them participate in the behaviors, what influences them to the point where they end up participating in sinful and immoral behavior, is spiritual bottom feeders whose actual philosophy encourages them, and in the least allows them to do these behaviors. For example, we've all heard the saying of, that is the wrong crowd. Well, why is it the wrong crowd? Because they have a spiritual bottom feeder philosophy, and they will tempt a good Christian child to partake in their sinful and immoral activities. So, therefore, the argument that just because someone is a Christian doesn't mean that they're a good person is almost completely irrelevant. Because this is what must be done. Now listen carefully. For the same reason one is not allowed to legally make a terrorist threat, one is not legally allowed to threaten, the president and what have you, especially, is the same reason that one should not go through the motion or start launching an attack on morality. Because the price that we have paid for allowing spiritual bottom feeders to launch attacks on morality over the years has been millions and millions and millions of preventable deaths. Their materialism and their indifference, their LGBT philosophy of selfishness, their feminism philosophies of abortion, their eugenic philosophies have killed millions and millions of people. 65 million preventable deaths a year. So what must be done is these philosophies, because they are directly linked to murder, if you have a fucking brain, they're directly linked to preventable deaths, soft kills, covert drugging. They are directly linked to abortion, which is basically the murder of babies. These philosophies need to be suppressed. Now, because I am a reasonable man, I would say that these people should be allowed to have, little bars that they're allowed to go to, little groups, little things like that. But they shouldn't be allowed to be politically active. They shouldn't be allowed to manipulate things behind the scenes. There should be people who think like me, who are as perceptive as I am, that keep a close eye on those groups and those peoples and all secret societies to make sure that spiritual bottom-feeding philosophies are not being secretly impressed upon us, that they have their influence limited, They can say what they want to each other. They can do what they want to each other as long as it's legal. But they cannot, in a perfect world, spread their philosophies because they have killed millions of people. It's quite sad that we want to crack down on ISIS, when hundreds of times more people than ISIS has killed are being killed by spiritual bottom feeders and their activities. So we absolutely must suppress these people. We must reduce their size. We must limit them. And if that is not enough, we must imprison them. If we cannot get a hold of these spiritual bottom feeders' philosophies, we must imprison them. What you are doing is killing 65 million people every year. Preventable deaths alone. 65 million plus. Therefore, we cannot allow you to continue to do it. You must be imprisoned. You must be stopped if you will not accommodate the needs of the vulnerable people that you are murdering every year, just as bad as if you have shot them. And we don't want to hear, well, it's not your fault. We know it's your fault. We know that if we lived in a real Christian society, there would be very few preventable deaths. And I would add the term obviously preventable deaths. Deaths as a result of poverty. Poverty that only exists because people do not have the moral will to prevent it from occurring. And why do they not have that moral will? Because celebrities, politicians, entertainers are allowing and promoting spiritual bottom feeding philosophies, lifestyles, and trends. That must stop. All you guys need will either be stripped of your rank as a celebrity, your ability to appear on TV, or you will repent and turn to God and you will promote being a good Christian, or at least Christian morality. And any corruption from within. You see, capital punishment for all those who would try to infiltrate the political process of suppressing spiritual bottom feeder philosophies, and life without the possibility of parole for any spiritual bottom feeders that find a sneaky way to try to manipulate society from behind the scenes. This cannot be tolerated. And the moment the government is not effectively suppressing spiritual bottom feeding philosophies, it must be overthrown. That, my friends, is absolutely what must be done. And if you truly listen to what I am saying, you know damn well I am right. For spiritual bottom feeders to lead the charge as neocons and little sissy liberals against ISIS under the pretext that they are a threat to the West and our values has provided an infallible argument, an infallible truth, a self-evident truth that spiritual bottom feeder philosophies must be suppressed and attacked with 1,000 times the conviction, because they are killing hundreds of times as many people. Thank you.